Chad, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome
Of
back.
course. Yeah, welcome back. I am really excited about this conversation. The book is, it's beautiful. It's powerful. Thank you for writing it. And I think what made it so powerful for me was not just the ideas in it, which are powerful, but the fact that you yourself have been living this for so many years in really difficult situations. So I want to thank you for the book and for that life that you've lived.
When you say that, it's funny because it's been such an imperfect life. And I've learned from hard experiences that a lot of the stories in the book are actually me messing this up. But there is something about that in Jesus and our culture that I think is really important to acknowledge, right? Like the messing up part is when we need Jesus.
Yes.
And a lot of times I feel like we talk about it in an opposite way, right? The more I'm doing well, right, that's when I'm more righteous, and that's when Jesus is more in my life. But I've actually found that those were the moments when I really stumbled that I found Jesus, and that Jesus helped me find a way through.
Yeah, I love that.
And so, trying to live it might be the thing instead of living
that
it,
makes
because
sense.
Lots of mistakes along the way.
And as I'll just say, for me personally, as I reflect on my own life and read your book, the sin that I'm more familiar with is not the sin of messing up; it's the sin of lacking engagement entirely. And so it's powerful for me to read about your engagement, regardless of how many stumbling blocks there may have been. One of the most interesting parts of the book for me was pretty early on. I think 20-30% in, you relate a story, the power saw and the screwdriver. Would you mind starting there?
Yeah. I was a young professor trying to start a peace building program, and I got invited onto a talk show that the university did. And it was actually kind of a big deal. There was like 200 students there. It was like a David Letterman type thing. Like they had, a band that played, and they had a musical number. And they asked me if I would come on and talk about peace building, because I was trying to pitch it and trying to get students to think about it at the time. And they had another professor. He was a political science professor on with me, and we were both on the stage together, sitting in chairs like right next to each other. And he went first, and he was talking about international relations and conflict resolution from a political science perspective. And he brought with him this tool bag. And inside the tool bag, he had hammers, screwdrivers, a power saw, and he had an analogy for each one of these tools about what their use was in political science and international relations. All fine. But then he pulled out of his pocket a small little screwdriver that you like adjust glasses with. And then he said, and this is peace building. And he looked at me, and it got a huge reaction from the audience. People were laughing. I was embarrassed. I felt humiliated. It's not like the first time that I had heard, peacemaking is weak, it's soft, right? This is macho international relations over here, and then there's this weak peace builder. And I tried to make a joke. I was like, I've been looking for that everywhere. Can I have it back? But no one laughed. Everybody's like, dude, you've been roasted on the stage. And I really felt humiliated, but a thought occurred to me as I was on the stage when it became my time. And so when I was asked to describe peace building, I actually asked him, can I have that screwdriver? And can I borrow the power saw for a second? And then I walked into the audience and I said, look, here's the issue that I have with this. People at the end of the day run these systems. People are the people in charge of the violence and war and conflict throughout the world. It's not just systems, right? People run those systems. So at the end of the day, when we're thinking about change, we're thinking about changing people. So I'm just going to grab this person in the audience and ask you, I need to change you. Which tool would you prefer that I use? The chainsaw or the screwdriver? They said screwdriver. And then I was relentless. I went person after person after person. I asked political science majors to raise their hands and went right up to them with a saw in one hand, with a screwdriver in the other, asking them, which would you like used on you? And unanimously, people picked the screwdriver. And then I turned and looked at him and said, and that's why international relations has failed and why we need more peace building. I got a standing ovation, felt super righteous in the moment. Yeah. Yes. Like I took him down, and it wasn't until a couple of years later, where this man had worked relentlessly to stop peace building from happening, to muster the defenses against that I'm sitting in my dean's office. I'm asking myself, what did I do to this guy? Why is this guy relentlessly attacking me and coming after me? And he looked at me and he said, because you used a power saw on him a couple of years ago, right? You humiliated him in front of everybody else. And it didn't even occur to me, Tim, until that moment, right? This is a great example of me messing up the message, right? The message was true. The problem was I was actually not using the screwdriver. I was using the power saw.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think what's so tricky for me in that story too is like the results. I mean, well, I'll let you sort of like share your explanation here, but the results in the moment were actually really good. Like there's a room full of 200 people that are going to, at the end of this session, probably lean one way or the other. They're going to come away with a view of international relations and a view of peace building. And you left there with 200 advocates for peace building. Like that seems like a pretty significant win.
It was, and it wasn't. They also turned into, I don't know a better word for it, little terrorists, right? Like they went around also making fun of business majors and poli-sci majors and various other groups. My students took the lead, right from me. We're doing the good thing. We're doing the righteous thing. We're doing the peaceful thing. We're doing the Christian thing. The rest of the group wasn't. And I had a lot of repenting to do, right? Because I actually set in motion a conflict escalation that it was small. It was a small thing on a college campus, but at the same time, it was a big thing because in the process of doing it, we were misrepresenting the actual message that we have to have, and it so much reminds me of where I end up trying to start the book, right? Because this is the same conversation that we have about Jesus and Jesus as peacemaker, as Prince of Peace, versus Jesus as Messiah, the Messiah that's coming to save us from fill in the blank, right? The evildoers of the world. And that tension that exists there is a really, really difficult tension to navigate.
Yeah. I think that's what I would love to hear you address, actually, because I think I've become aware that especially in our faith community, but in anywhere where the conflict is really tethered to morals and values, that the peace building, I think, to one side can very often feel like compromising your values. And so I understand that way of thinking, that this is the opposite of what Jesus wants. Jesus wants you to flip tables and be bold and stand up for what you believe all the way. And I can also imagine on another side that if there's an element of peace building that means listening and the conflict is about not feeling listened to, then that can feel like more of the same harm. And so I want you to like make a case for both sides being interested in peace building.
Yeah, the Jesus that flips tables, it's always interesting. The Jesus with the whip. We're seeing a lot of advertisements for The Chosen right now that's showing Jesus with a whip. It makes me uncomfortable in part because it's one story taken out of context, where you've got an entire 4 gospels of Jesus operating in a very different way. But we're attracted to that. I understand why that's an advertisement, right? It looks so cool. Jesus looks so cool with that whip at his side, like Indiana Jones, right? Coming in, he's going to overturn tables. And I think that's what, in a lot of ways, we want a Messiah to do. We want someone else to save us, right, from our problems. As a conflict mediator, this is the thing that I hear literally every day when I have a client coming in and they're talking about their conflict. Conflict is happening to me. I'm the victim of conflict. I'm being hurt. I don't feel respected. I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard. And on the other side, there's the person who is causing the conflict. Yeah. And what they want me to do as the mediator is change them, fix them, help me. Together, they'll say, we can defeat this other person because I've been unsuccessful being able to do it, right? And that to me is a fundamental misunderstanding about what's going to happen with me as a mediator, what's going to be required. But I think it's a very human understanding, right? It's hard to take accountability that I'm in a conflict pattern. It was hard for me, by the way, to see that I had actually lit a match when I did the power saw screwdriver thing. I thought I was resolving conflict, but I was actually escalating it, but I was completely blind to it. And I'm supposed to be a quote unquote expert on these things, right? And I couldn't see it either. And I think the same thing's happening with Jesus, right? Like if you look at the socio-political context which Jesus arrives, they're under Roman rule. The Romans are brutal. They're brutal colonizers. Their religious freedom is curtailed. Their political freedom is curtailed. Their economic freedom is curtailed. They are upset. They are praying that a Messiah is going to come and militarily deliver them, defeat the Romans, meet the Roman force and violence with greater force and greater violence, right? To prove that God is good, to prove that they are God's people, right? And that all from a human standpoint and from a conflict standpoint makes a lot of sense to me. But it's also pretty problematic when Jesus shows up at his hometown in Nazareth at the start of his ministry. He opens up a scroll and he reads from Isaiah, a messianic scripture, but not at all the Messiah that they're expecting, right? This is a Messiah that's going to heal the brokenhearted. Who's going to take care of the poor and needy, that's going to institute Jubilee or the year of the Lord, which is about reconciliation and forgiveness. And it's interesting to me that he even edits out the last line of that verse in Isaiah. Jesus actually stops mid-verse and leaves out the last little line, and the vengeance of the Lord.
Oh, wow.
And leaves out the vengeance part,
wow.
Right? And if you remember the description, people are confused. They're like, isn't this Joseph's son? Like, what's going on here? They ask him to perform a miracle. He doesn't want to do that. And then they get so angry that they actually try to throw him off a cliff at the end. And to my knowledge, Jesus never returns to his hometown of Nazareth. A difficult way to start a ministry, right? To start a movement, basically being run out of your hometown. And I think one of the explanations among many was that's not the peace that we want, right? That we want the peace where the enemy's butt is kicked, right? At the end. Jesus offers us instead the peace that we need. But the peace that we need often isn't the peace that we want.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm thinking a little bit more about your power saw story as an example of what I'm struggling with. And there's one way to hear that story and sort of say that the way you handled it was wrong in the end because of the results. Yeah. Like you ended up accidentally creating an army of peace builders wielding power saws, and you also created an enemy who was sort of intent on taking down the peace building program. So it's like, okay, the outcome meant that this was the wrong tool. I'm wondering though, if there's an underlying ethic that can stand on its own, regardless of the outcome, that should tell us that we need to participate in peace building. Because I think we get involved in these arguments. Like you think about, the war in Ukraine, for example, and like what America's involvement should be. And it's like, we're arguing mostly about only the ends, and there's not an underlying principle that we seem to be able to align on.
Yeah. I think of a lot about the principles that I messed up in the moment. I talk about 4 of these in the book, right? I'm seen with the eyes of our heart, loving our enemies. That clearly wasn't actually happening in that moment, right? I didn't see this professor and think, okay, he maybe sees my program as a threat. Maybe he's worked really, really hard his entire life to put these principles into play that is how he's lived his life. And here I am coming along, this young professor, questioning all of that, challenging all that. It would be a very human thing, right? To try to nip it in the bud a little bit, especially when I've spent my entire life and career. I didn't see any of that there. All I saw was he was humiliating me. Second principle, we roll away stones, we don't throw stones. I think it's pretty clear that I was throwing stones at Phil there, that the whole point of that was to wound him. It could have been, right, that my whole point was to convince people about the merit of peace building.
Yeah.
But I actually don't think, if I'm honest with myself, that was the intent that I had in the moment. The intent was, you threw some stones at me. I'm about ready to throw some much bigger and harder stones back your way. I think that's what was so satisfying at the moment, because I knew he was wounded, right? And not just his argument, he was, right? Yeah. And then we talk about the risk of embrace, right? Like, at no point, I'm ashamed to say this, but at no point over those next 2 years did I go to his office, try to reconcile with him, try to say, hey, let's have a private conversation. Let's work through where our similarities are. Let's talk about our differences. Let's try to figure out how we can give our students both perspectives, because both of them are valuable at the moment. Instead of tearing each other down, let's figure out how we collaborate and work together. Didn't happen.
Yeah.
I didn't do any of that. I knew there was an issue. I didn't follow my own, right, my own sort of ethical compass.
Yeah.
And then, look at the end of the day, I had a professor once when I was studying conflict in grad school. And as he was teaching me, I was thinking about a conflict that I had in my life, and which was incompatible with all the things that he was teaching me. And I wanted to come and get some advice to him. And so I thought about this a lot, because I was also embarrassed by the conflict, and I didn't want the professor to think poorly of me. So I actually rehearsed over and over again how I was going to tell this story in a way that didn't make me look bad or like an idiot, that he wouldn't kick me out of the peace building program. But I honestly, really genuinely wanted his advice on the issue. I finally got the courage. I sat down in his office. His name was Rich Rubenstein. He was a professor at George Mason University. I tell him the story perfectly told, and he pauses for the longest time and looks at me and he says, Chad, I don't know that I have any answers for you, but I will tell you one thing. I've found in life that you can either be right or you can have peace. It's really up to you which one you want. And I was mad at that answer. I'm like, I want both, actually. I want to both be right and I want to have peace. And it took me years to truly understand what he was actually telling me that day, right? Like, there are rights and there are deeper rights. In Hawaiian, we have this word called pono, which means that things are right. But Hawaiians are great in their language. Sometimes when they want to emphasize something, they'll just add the same word to it. So pono is most right, right? Like, I'm being most right. So I might be right on the facts, but I can be deeply wrong in the relationship. Yeah. I might be right on the outcome, but I could be deeply wrong about how I went about getting to that outcome. And at the end of the day, what I hear Jesus saying in the scriptures is that it's the reconciliation that matters the most. It's really the title of the book, right? It's this conversation that he's having with Peter after I think Peter is overwhelmed by the Sermon on the Mount and so many things. We've got to remember the Sermon on the Mount was directed directly at the apostles. Right. And he's asking them to live this higher law that is incredibly difficult to live. And I think Peter has concerns, right? Like, you're telling me when someone slaps me on the face, I'm supposed to turn the other cheek, that I'm supposed to forgive people that have wronged me. I'm sure Peter, like so many people at the time, was filled with grudges and frustration for the way that he's treated, that the Romans are treating them, what have you. And here's Jesus telling him all those things. So at some point he tells Jesus, what about let's put a limit on it, right? Like, what about 7? And when Jesus says 70 times 7, I think there's a couple of things that are going on there. I don't think this is just about forgiveness, right? 7 is a perfect number in Hebrew. It means perfection. When a rabbi multiplies it, they're emphasizing it, right? They're giving it deep emphasis, almost to infinity. And what I hear Jesus saying, which I think plays out through his whole ministry, is, look, Peter, we do it until it's done, right? As many times as its take, I am here not just to reconcile you to the Father, but to reconcile us to each other, right? In fact, the two are connected to each other. Love of God and love of neighbor are connected. We can't be reconciled with the Father if we can't learn how to reconcile with each other. This is the ministry, right? It's Paul refers to it later as the ministry of reconciliation, right? This is what we're about. This is the movement, right? This is what builds the kingdom of heaven on earth, Peter. And we keep doing it until it's done.
Yeah.
But how do you think about objective truth and what's the difference between reconciling and pacifying? Because it feels like there, throughout time and even in our own community, that there have been moments of where objectively someone is, or some group is being harmed, and it's a conflict that needs to not be pacified. There needs to be some sort of change. It's more natural for me, like Tim, to just avoid the conflict. So like, what's the role of objective truth in the cases of conflicts where someone is actually actively being harmed? I know in myself that I'm hearing like permission to disengage and step back and just let it be.
It's an amazing question. And I wrestle with it, by the way. I just want to be honest. Like, I wrestle with this every day. And part of what was hard about writing this book is it's not like Jesus isn't being asked the same question, right? It's not like people aren't being harmed.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like they're not suffering, right? From again, a lack of religious freedom, economic exploitation, colonization, violence, right? These aren't like abstract ideas that Jesus is talking about. I mean, they are grounded. They are like rooted right in the real world experiences of the people that he's teaching. And I think it's why Peter and others struggle, right, with this stuff. They're asking the same question. It's why the person asked Jesus what the most important commandments is, and Jesus asked them, well, how do you read it? And it says, love God and love your neighbor. But then he says, and it's interesting, the wording in the scriptures is to justify himself. He asked Jesus, well, then who is my neighbor, right? Because if it can be true that not everybody is my neighbor, then I can respond with violence. I can respond with hate. And Jesus takes that question, plants it on a real road, the Jericho road, a real place, right, where anybody from Jerusalem would know is a dangerous road, right? Because you've got people bringing their stuff to Jerusalem to sell, and thieves will take it from you. Or you have people who have sold stuff at Jerusalem who are now bringing their money back to their community, and the thieves are there. It's a windy road. Jerusalem's on the top of a mountain. Jericho's the lowest place on earth, right? Down by the Dead Sea. And so he takes a really real world danger situation and puts a wounded person on the side of the road and asks people, okay, what's the rabbi do? Passes them. What's the priest do? The Levite passes them on the side of the road. The Samaritan, the enemy stops. And I think part of the point was there's real risk there. There's a reason why they don't stop. Fear, right? Like, what will happen to me if I stop and do this thing? And Jesus really reverses the question and says, what will happen to them? When I hear this question, I think a lot that there's an understanding that I don't totally understand, which is that somehow responding to violence with violence is going to solve the problem, that somehow it's going to protect us, or it's going to end the conflict, that somehow, like me using the chainsaw on Phil, is going to actually solve our issues. And when I work with people a lot in conflict, they're in bad patterns a lot of times. And a lot of times this isn't even violence, just bad communication patterns.
Yeah.
So like emotionally violent or verbally sort of violent towards each other. And we'll get in the mediation and it'll start again. Right? The same pattern that they've evidenced over and over again. And I'll stop them and I'll say, does this like what it looks like at home or at work? Yep. Yeah, this is what it looks like. Has it been working for you? Absolutely not. That's why we're here. Is it working now? No, it's not. I'm getting more and more frustrated. Well, why are you doing it? And there's just a blank stare at me. Do you think somehow as a mediator, I'm like an alchemist and I'm going to kind of take your crap and turn it into gold? Because I can promise you, I have none of those skills, right? Like I can't take a bad pattern and make it good. And so this is a really hard thing, because I think part of what Jesus is saying is we can't make bad things good, right? We can make good things good, right? And so we have not lived in a world, and certainly Jesus didn't live in it, where we've actually tried Jesus's way.
Yeah.
Right. And so the skepticism, I get it. It's real. What about Ukraine? I always like to say, what about Hitler? Right. Yeah. Like, are we supposed to, just to stand aside? And, my first response to that is, well, let's start in our own lives. I'm really sorry if Hitler's in your life, like personally like you have a real Hitler, in your life. But my guess is you probably don't. But when we say that, what we're actually saying is, I want to be let off the hook here. Like this person isn't going to be the sort of partner that I can reconcile with. And so therefore I want something else. I kind of want the Messiah, the military Messiah again, to come and knock them down a few notches, because that's what they need. That's the only language they'll understand, is more power than the power that they're wielding. Yeah. And I as hard as it is, I think Jesus is actually saying that's never going to get you the peace that you think it's going to get you. It's dead. It's a dead end. You've got to try something else. Yeah. Let me
just keep pushing on this thread a little bit. It's so challenging for me. I'm examining my own heart and asking, am I searching for justification for some of my own behaviors? And I don't Ukraine is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. We've talked with, many families there that have been significantly affected. We've done a Zoom video tour as we walked through the home of somebody that had been completely destroyed by Russian missiles, And I think this is what is so challenging for me. We hear, like the current administration, for instance, I think they're making arguments like we're the administration, we're the party of peace. We don't want to send weapons anymore. Like we're doing something else. And I think that has real appeal for me. It's like, of course I want this to end. Of course I don't want to see that type of violence that we've witnessed. And yet, there's something still uncomfortable, niggling at me that says this way doesn't seem like the way to the pono of peace, And so it's really tough.
I think it is tough. I think Jesus is tough, right? I mean, can you imagine Peter saying the same thing to Jesus? Like, what are we doing here? Yeah. Like, when are we overthrowing the government, right? Like when are we taking out the Romans? I actually think there's this really sort of sad moment at the end of Jesus's mortal life, right? Where he makes his entry into Jerusalem. He's just healed Lazarus. He's at his peak popularity. The people are waving palm fronds, right? They're shouting Hosanna, which means like literally God save us, right? The Pharisees are uncomfortable. The Romans are uncomfortable. It feels like Jesus is coming to militarily take over Jerusalem. It's there. There's one scholar, I find this so fascinating. There's one scholar who actually believes that Judas selling out Jesus was to ignite the revolution. That what Judas actually was trying to do was get Jesus arrested because it would fan the flames of sort of popular furor at the time, and that people would rise up against the Romans, and the war would the war would begin. There's some evidence for it in Judas's reaction when he finds out that Jesus is actually condemned. He actually regrets what he's done. He actually gives back
That's interesting.
the
Wow.
money.
Yeah.
Right? We don't ever talk about Judas this way. He like gives back the money. I mean, it's an interesting way
Wow.
of sort of thinking about even one of his own apostles betraying Jesus, but maybe not in the way that we think about betrayal. Not betraying him because he turned him in, betraying him because he was trying to start a violent revolution.
Oh my gosh.
And Jesus is going to leave Jerusalem carrying a cross.
Wow.
And his disciples are devastated by this. And they end up afterwards locking themselves in a room, in a room in Jerusalem, locking themselves in from the inside, probably thinking to themselves, what's going to happen to, that can happen to Jesus. Like, what's going to happen to us? And then a resurrected Jesus shows up inside the room, shows them his arms, his hands, his feet, and says to them, Shalom, peace be unto you. Hello. And it's so interesting. He walks and talks with his apostles. They still don't quite get it. They go back to Galilee, right? I'm sure afraid for their life. Also, maybe looking at Jesus as, well, we're saved, right? Like that revolution thing didn't really work out, but like at least we're saved. And Jesus has to appear to them again on a seashore and ask Peter that probing question: do you care more about these fish than you do about me? Go feed my lambs. And Peter does start a revolution, but it's not the revolution that they thought about. Or it was coming, but it does change the world, right? There is no Christianity without that moment. And I think Peter finally gets it on the seashore with Jesus. Yes, Jesus is the Messiah. Yes, he's starting a revolution, but it's so different than the revolution that we thought. Mm-hmm. And he gave his life to show us, right? I'm not going to fight. When Peter cuts the ear off, he says, people who live by the sword die by the sword, right? He's going to go about this a different way. Wow. Do we believe Jesus enough to have faith that there is a different way? I think Gandhi did. Yeah. I think Martin Luther King did. I think there are people, Howard Thurman did. The question for all of us is, do we?
Yeah. I don't know if I do.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. Like if I and maybe this is totally unusable. I just think, like I'm making the analogy, Rome is Russia. Judah is, Israel is Ukraine. And, it's very easy to look back 2,000 years and be like, isn't this cool? Like they didn't see it. They didn't see that there's this other way and we can apply that to our lives. And then if I actually apply it and say, we're going to live this other way. What I worry about in particular is that people are like, you know what? Like it's a spiritual revolution. There's another life coming as evidenced by Jesus being resurrected and saying, now we have peace, and just pushing this off and letting all of this suffering and all of this oppression happen today, which I'm sure today is happening. I'm like somewhat uncertain, to be honest, about like what's coming next, and so that worries me.
I think it should, because look, conflict avoidance isn't what Jesus is calling for here, but I think it's a natural human reaction to this, right? How I'm going to read Jesus is just go pray, read my scriptures, take care of my family, lock myself in a room, right? Just like the apostles did, go fishing, right? And just let things take their course the way that they're going to take their course. I think that's a really common reaction. And the other one is fight, right? Like I'm going to go on, I'm going to fight, right? It's the fight or flight, natural human reaction to fear that you're talking about here, Tim, right?
Yes.
And you're bouncing between those two things right now, because typically those are the two tools we're given, right? Yeah. Those are the tools, those are the options that we think are available to us. What I'm saying is Jesus gave us a different option.
Yes.
And it's not flee. He doesn't actually go to Peter and say, hey, cool, I get it. It's kind of scary. Just hang out at a boat. He actually tells him to essentially walk into the lion's den right now.
Yeah.
And he knows, Jesus knows, by the way, I don't know that Peter and the rest of the apostles know, they're all going to their deaths, right? They're actually all going to die doing what they are going to do next. They are going to face severe persecution. It is going to be terrifying what they're going to do next. And when you look at what Gandhi did and what Martin Luther King did, it's the same thing. They did not ask people to passively sit by.
I agree.
And let bad things happen. They actually asked them to actively go out and protest, to march, but they asked them to do it with love towards their enemies, in Jesus's way. And the goal was that violence will triumph for a while. And you look at the start of the civil rights movement, you look at the 30 years that it took Gandhi to essentially overthrow the British Empire. And the first reaction was more violence on top of the nonviolence, right? But over time, this is the problem with force and violence, right? It works until it doesn't work anymore, right?
Yeah.
Dictators use violence, and they increase that violence to get submission from their people, and it works until it doesn't anymore, until people finally say enough. Enough is enough. And look, it takes 400 years, but the Roman Empire is toppled by Jesus.
Yeah.
Right. It actually is toppled by Jesus. It becomes the Christian empire. It takes 400 years.
Yeah.
But it happens. But I don't think what I'm saying that Jesus is saying to you or to anybody else is that you sit by and pray that God takes care of it for us. I actually think God, like with Enoch, is actually asking us to go and do.
Yeah.
The question is, can we do it his way?
Yeah. I think what's challenging for me is I agree. There's a third way. It's not always fight or flight, but with the third way, my intuition says that it requires the other party to be operating somewhat in good faith. And if there is no good faith, if you come to them attempting to engage in the third way and their answer is to disappear you, then it seems problematic.
Yeah. I think that's the ideal world. The real world is that a lot of times other people aren't acting in good faith. This is where I've been really influenced by the Menanites and the Quakers, two historic, Christian peace churches. I read a lot of their stuff going in there because I think it's so fascinating what they do with their theology, and they come from different places, right? The Quakers come out of England as sort of a response to the Church of England. The Mennonites are Anabaptist, right? One of the starting Protestant churches. But the one thing that they have in common, which I think is so interesting when they were reading the Bible, was that when they read the Bible, they believe that inside every human being is a light. The light of God. And that why Jesus was so effective was that he helped people discover it. So when he goes to the prostitute or the tax collector or the leper or what have you, Jesus sees it clearly. Other people don't often see it in themselves. And Jesus helps them uncover it, and they become different people in those moments. So when Quakers started building what is now modern Western mediation, right? They are the authors. If you go to mediation right now, you're actually following a Quaker model and you don't even know it, right? Cool. Their whole point of the mediation was that our job is to help people discover the light inside of themselves that they may be missing and can't see, and the light inside of others. And we deeply believe that this to be true because we are children of God. It's there, whether you see it or not. And I think when Jesus says, turn the other cheek, I actually think this is that teaching, right? Tim, if you slap me on the cheek, what do you expect me to do?
I expect you to probably slap me back.
Most likely slap back. Or if you're way bigger or stronger than me, you might expect me to run.
You might run, yeah.
Yeah, to get away from me.
I was using a real example. I'd expect you to slap me back.
Yeah. Of course you would. And if I slapped you back, would you feel like, oh, I was wrong at that moment? How would you feel if I slapped you back?
I feel like whatever rush of hormones that I would have would put me into a very much fight type of posture.
And it would be interesting because probably what's going to go on in your head is you're going to say something like, well, Chad deserved the slap but
Right.
I didn't
Exactly.
back.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
clearly not taking responsibility for what he did. And by the way, he slapped me way harder
Yeah.
than I slapped him, because you don't know what a slap feels like when you do the slapping, right?
Yeah.
But you certainly know when you get slapped what it feels like, right?
Yeah.
And so now your justification is double to slap me back and start the conflict
And that
escalations.
justification can probably happen very, very quickly in just a split second.
Yeah. But Jesus, notice he doesn't tell you to do either. He doesn't say run away from it, nor does he tell you to slap back. He says, actually give him the other cheek. Actually say, Tim, it seems like you're really upset right now. And it feels like you need to get this out. I don't necessarily want you to, but if you need to slap me on the other cheek, I understand. Your reaction is totally different at that point, right? Your justification, I've taken it all away. I've invited you to see the light, because I've seen the light in you. I've invited you to see the light in me and yourself. And it's a very de-escalatory move. Now, you might strike me again, or a third time, or a fourth time. But every strike, your justification continues to go away. You start to see me suffering. You see the humanity within me, and your justification for continuing to inflict the suffering continues to dwindle. So there's this amazing moment in the film Gandhi, where he's with Charlie Andrews, the priest, and Gandhi's telling him, I love this story about Jesus. And Charlie Andrews tells him, like, it's metaphorical. Right? Like, it's not meant to be literal. He's a Catholic priest trying to tell Gandhi it's not meant to be literal.
Wow.
And Gandhi says to him, I disagree. I've actually seen this work. I've been doing nonviolent protests. And I actually think what Jesus is saying here is that I'm not going to flee or I'm going to fight. I'm going to follow this third way. And in the end, I'm going to connect my humanity to the person that's doing it. It's going to work. And I love Charlie Andrews, the Christian priest, trying to tell him, it's metaphorical. I can't tell you how many Christians I know who think that the Noah Ark story is literal. Like, there was 2 of every animal on a boat, right? The Adam and Eve story is literal. All of these, all the healings and everything else is literal. But when it comes to the Sermon on the Mount, that's metaphorical. Right?
Wow,
when it comes to the teachings of Jesus, that we're not supposed to actually take literally. And I understand it, because it's no harm for me to believe that Noah built an ark and put 2 of every animal on it. Like, that impacts me zero in my life. But if Jesus means it literally, that impacts me greatly.
Yeah.
And it's scary, and it's hard. And look, everyone that I work with is skeptical. I'm skeptical, by the way, all the time. I just got back from Jerusalem, and we were on a podcast together, I don't know, 8 months ago, a year ago, watching 500 days of war and what it's done to the peace movement there. The number of Palestinians and Israelis that I knew that were stalwarts in the peace movement, that maybe a little bit like what you're referring to, said, this is a line too far.
Yeah.
October 7th, I'm sorry. I can't, Palestinians cannot be a partner to me anymore. The bombings in Gaza, I'm sorry, I can't. Tens of thousands of women and children killed, infrastructure destroyed, people starving. Israelis can't be a partner for me anymore. People who have dedicated their lives to peace actually throwing their hands up in the air and saying, this is a line too far. And then on top of that, USAID goes away, funding for programs like this all start to disappear, and the sense of jadedness that maybe the only thing that matters is force. Maybe the only thing that matters is power. I had a Palestinian partner that I've worked with for years tell me we were grabbing something to eat right before I got on a plane. Like, Chad, I just don't know anymore that peace building is even a thing anymore. Like, look at the world. Look where we're going. Look where America's going. Look where the world's going right now. And I sat and wrestled with that on a really long, it's a long plane ride back, because there were a few times that prayer went up, like the prayer that went up from the Father who brought his son to Jesus. Lord, help me in my unbelief.
Yeah.
because I'm sitting on this plane right now saying that makes logical sense to me. That's my analysis of like where the world is going and what is happening right now, a true crisis of faith.
Yeah.
I'm sitting on that plane for weeks, having my students come to me and saying, "Hey, Chad, how did it go? And did you like fix everything and solve everything?" I'm like, no, actually, most of the nonprofits are going out of business right now. Like most of this peace building stuff has been derailed. And laying up at night trying to figure out, the old Irish prayer, "Lord, help me make a way out of no way."
Yeah. I think what's emerging for me is that there might be a fourth way that I'm really uncomfortable with that is actually manifesting itself in the world right now. So there's fight, there's flight, there's engage in the Jesus way, and then there's align yourself with the goals and the values of the oppressor and pretend it's the Jesus way. And I think that's what I'm really struggling with. And I think we see that all too often. It's actually if you think about it, it's another easy way out. And if you act like it's the Jesus way, then you've got some like air cover, but you're actually doing something that's really harmful.
Yeah. It's living in a post-Jesus Christian world.
Yeah.
Where Jesus is flying an F-18, dropping bombs on one end, or Jesus is ignoring oppression. Hey, can you hand me that? I just want to read you like one little one little line from this, because like that's hard to justify with the first time that this is describing his mission, right, in Nazareth. Like look at these are the words in Luke. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and the recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord." That doesn't seem like he's siding with the oppressors.
Yeah.
It sounds like a Jesus that's siding with the oppressed.
Yeah.
But there's this really difficult point. Miroslav Volf talks about this a lot. He's an amazing theologian, Serbian theologian that was writing a book during the Serbian conflict that was happening, the Balkans conflict. And he has this line that I stumbled over again and again in this book, as he watched absolute devastation of the former Yugoslavia fall apart and just turn into genocide. That's what is happening, right? Like, yes, Jesus is there for the oppressed, but he also calls the oppressed to repentance. Yes, Jesus calls the oppressor to repentance, but Jesus also is there for the oppressor. And I wrestled with that because I've always had it a little differently. Jesus is there for the oppressed. He's against the oppressor. Yeah. And the oppressor is the one that has to repent, not the oppressed. And as I kept diving into this, right, over and over again, reading this, like, what is going on here? It started to resonate me. Like when I'm oppressed, when I've been mistreated and hurt and wounded, something inside of me starts to happen. A poison starts to come into my veins. Of anger and hatred, a sense of disconnection from people in the world, sometimes entire groups of people, because I can now associate, someone else with that oppression in me, in ways that are the opposite of love your enemy, in ways that are the opposite, as I have loved you, love one another. Like my oppression, understandably so, can lead to a sense of disconnection from others. And Jesus calls us to repent from that, right? To go there. And of course, my oppression of others leads to those exact same issues and problems, which is why Jesus calls the oppressed to repent. When I was working with this woman that was a restorative justice practitioner, I loved how she started every session, because it was always clear in a session in a prison who was the oppressed and who was the oppressor. It was always really clear. There was actually a power imbalance. One's in jail, right? And the other is mourning. And she would start the conversation by asking each person 2 questions. Can you tell me a time in your life where you've been really hurt by another person? And now can you tell me a time in your life when you've hurt somebody? I want you to talk about both. and her way of leveling the playing field. Even though we can't just make equivalences of what had happened, we all have the experience of being hurt, disappointed, mistreated, disrespected, unseen. And we've all actually participated in that exact same effort towards others. We know what it's like. And Jesus asks us to let go of all of that. He's there to heal. He's there to reconcile. He's there to restore. And by the way, if you've been hurt and you've been oppressed and are continuing to be oppressed right now, and you don't feel like you can get there, I'm going to be the last person in the world to judge you. I'm going to be the last. I hold grudges for way worse than what some people are suffering from right now. I've struggled to practice as Jesus's tools when I've been mildly offended or mildly put out or mistreated, let alone the oppression that some of my brothers and sisters are feeling in the world right now. And so if it's too much, look, I didn't write this book to tell you, hey, go repent, like get over it. But I wanted to write the book to say there is a path when we're ready to approach it. And, coming back from being in Israel, Palestine, one of the things that hit me the most coming back is there are people that are reconciling there. Despite all of that, what I just talked about, there's some people who have not given up hope. There's some people that are still doing the act of reconciliation. What's my excuse? What's my excuse back home? Those are the people that give me hope.
Thank you so much for that. I'm realizing as you're talking that I think I keep catching myself defining or thinking of peace as really as an absence of conflict. And so I'm imagining these scenarios that are closer to home and thinking like, how do you stop fighting? And I'm realizing the way you're talking about peace is something much, much deeper. And that the reconciliation that you're describing is a peace that is genuine because it's deep on both sides. It's not that we're not fighting about it anymore. It's that we're reconciled in the sense that that we both we're like both in a good place, and we can move forward with like a personal peace too. But can I ask you about kind of a very close to home personal example? We've been in conversation all these last couple of weeks with Jared Halverson and a lot of women in our community, and this is something that I care a lot about. And it's been really interesting to have my own feelings, but also to sort of be watching this whole situation unfold and just observe the things that it brings up from people across the spectrum. And so, Jared says something that to a lot of people, a lot of women especially, it felt like it was contributing to a problem that was already very sensitive and like alive. And then Jared apologized, and he has been making great, and I have so much respect for the way he's handled this. Like he has put endless amounts of energy and deliberate attention around trying to understand blind spots and hear from women who have experiences that he will never have, and to try to understand. But I've noticed that some of the pushback that he's getting is that he shouldn't have apologized, that he said something, it's a hard truth. And if people want to be hurt by that, don't apologize. And then there were lots of different ways that people receive the apology. But I think I'm just trying to translate all of these concepts into something that's happening right now. And I can understand so many of these points of view, but I would love for you to give us your thoughts about a situation like this, where everyone feels so justified and it feels very connected to values that no one wants to compromise. And so and I love the idea that there really is something that can happen when you have like a heart connection, like when you have a conversation with someone who disagrees with you, and it's honest enough that you really come to some understanding that you didn't have before. Like I've seen that, how transformative that feels, but I wonder what that looks like in like a broader community conversation, because it feels really complicated.
It's a great microcosm of so many conflicts, right? I saw what Jared said. I saw the reaction to it. I saw Jared's apology, and I saw the reaction, some positive, some negative, to that as well. For people who know Jared, people came to his defense, right? This is a good guy. This wasn't what he intended. I've listened to him a lot. I've watched him. Wasn't what he was intended. There's also the truth, which is that it landed a particular way with a lot of people that was very harmful and hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody needs to take the time to actually listen to that, right? That harm that was done. There was a message there, another perspective. This is how those words land with me.
Mm-hmm.
And they hurt because I feel unseen. I feel unheard. I feel unacknowledged. I now actually feel blamed, right, as part of this as well. And Jared has two choices at that point, right? He can dig in and double down and say, quit being so sensitive. Why are you so upset? That's not what I intended. I'm a really good guy. Go look at all the people who think I'm a really good guy. Or he can do what I heard him do, which is say, I haven't been able to sleep because I've caused someone pain, right? And regardless of whether I intended to cause pain or not, the reality is that I have. And I've missed something in the process. My words were missing a key perspective, right? In it that now I can see is a blind spot that I had. Had I had that perspective, I think Jared said, I would have worded things differently, but I didn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen. I'm going to feel remorse, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to try to understand and have dialogue because I want to reconcile, and I don't want to make this mistake again. I don't ever want my words to hurt you the way that I just hurt them now. I worry just being on this podcast that could happen. I worry just talking about oppressed and oppressor that someone who's deeply hurt is going to hear my message and say, oh, Chad's telling me to suck it up, or that I don't follow Jesus the right way. And I want to say, like, that's not the intent here. And for those that say that Jared shouldn't apologize, I understand that maybe they felt there was some truth in what Jared said. And maybe it was something that someone may need to hear, but I hear this line a lot, like, stand my ground, my truth, right? Like, sometimes we just have to dig in because this value or this truth matters the most. And I've never quite understood that because I don't ever exist independently of other people, right? Even the language that I use, I learned from other people. I am always in relationship with other people, which means my truth is part of the truth. Your truth is part of the truth. It's really our truth. And the ground that we stand on in every moment is actually our ground. It's not mine. It's not yours. And what I saw Jared trying to do in those moments is acknowledge that. I may have delivered a truth that I thought was true, but it was also blind to your truth. It was blind to the pain that you're feeling. And because it was blind to that, it wasn't fully true, right? Because it didn't incorporate that together. Why should Jared stand his ground? Because the ground he stands on with women, in his family, right? In this larger faith community, in the world. There's no ground that Jared stands on that isn't with women. And we stand on that ground more solidly and more peacefully when we seek to understand each other, when we seek to understand each other's pain, when we seek to repent of times when we may have added to that pain, whether we intended to or not, and we open up our arms and risk embracing people that we've hurt. It was very vulnerable on both ends. It was vulnerable for those women to write in. He's a very well-loved person and tell their stories. That required incredible vulnerability. Some of them, I'm sure, got attacked for doing that. It was very vulnerable for Jared to apologize the way it is. It's vulnerable to do a podcast, by the way, right? Because you're trying to put something out in the world. It's vulnerable to write a book. Yeah. And I know it pains me already to know that some people are going to read this book and maybe it's going to cause a little bit more pain. And if it does, it's not the intent. It's actually to show us that no matter how stuck we are, no matter how much we feel like there's no way, there is a way. Yeah. And I think a lot about peace building is way making, right? Making the way out of no way. If you're not ready to make that way, if it's not the right time, if you're not in the right circumstances, I totally understand it. But I do believe there's a way.
Yeah.
Can I ask one closing question?
Yeah.
It strikes me as we were wrapping here, there's nothing easy about this.
Yeah.
This is the hardest path to walk in the world. In what sense to you is Jesus's yoke the easy one, and in what sense is his burden the light one?
So I want to go back to that professor, right in having peace. When we're right, there is a peace that comes from that, despite the fact that it might not be working in the moment, despite the fact that I might be reviled against, that I might be mistreated, that my reconciliation partner doesn't respond the way that I had hoped that they respond, despite the fact that I might still be suffering. There is a peace in seeing people with the eyes of our heart. There is a peace when we don't carry around all of these stones to throw anymore, and we let that burden off our back. There's a peace to not being locked up, but opening our arms up to embrace it, no matter how scary or vulnerable that feels. And I truly believe that I can reconcile with a person even when they're not reconciled with me. That though ideally that's the case, that I can be good with you. I can see you clearly. I can feel love for you, even if you can't quite return that favor. And there's liberation in that. There is freedom. There is healing in that. There is sight that is delivered. There is wealth that comes to us. There are hearts that become mended in that process. Jesus is giving us the path to peace, regardless of whether other people practice it towards us. By us practicing it, we become liberated. We become free. And that's the easy part.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Chad Ford. I also wanted to let you know that Chad will be running a series of workshops this fall along with Patrick Mason that focuses on peace-building skills. It's part of the Peacemakers Needed initiative, which is sponsored by Faith Matters and the One America movement. So stay tuned for more. And in the meantime, you can check out Chad's book, 70 times 7, on Amazon or at Deseret Book. Thanks again for listening.